Some films arrive too early. They challenge expectations, they confuse critics, they refuse to fit into simple categories, and because of that, they are dismissed. But time has a way of revealing truth. Today, we uncover 10 science fiction films from the 1990s that were misunderstood on release, yet now stand as visionary masterpieces that changed how we see reality, identity, and the future. Number 10, Dark City, 1998. The first thing that hits you is not the story. It is the feeling that something is wrong with the world itself. Streets shift without warning. Memories do not belong to the people who carry them. Dark City drops you into a nightmare that refuses to explain itself. Critics at the time called it confusing. Some even labeled it derivative. They were looking for clarity. The film was offering a question. At its core, this is not just a mystery. It is an investigation into identity. A man wakes with no memory and a murder accusation hanging over him. But the real horror is not the crime, it is the realization that every person in that city is being rewritten like a broken program. The strangers control everything. They rearrange buildings, they rewrite pasts, they turn human lives into experiments, and suddenly the film becomes something far deeper than a noir thriller. What critics missed was how bold this concept truly was. Years before virtual reality became a mainstream fear, this film was already asking what makes a person real. Is it memory? Is it choice? Or is it something deeper that cannot be manipulated? The visuals carried a heavy influence from German Expressionism. Your shadows stretch across impossible spaces. Time freezes at midnight. The world feels like a prison designed by something that does not understand humanity. Over time, the reputation changed. Viewers began to see what was hidden in plain sight. This was not a confusing film. It was a deliberate challenge. It refused to spoon-feed answers. It demanded attention. It demanded patience. And in doing so, it became one of the most quietly influential science fiction films of its decade. But if this world felt unstable, wait until we move into a story where space itself becomes something far more terrifying than death. Number 9, Event Horizon, 1997. There is a moment when the ship reveals what it has seen. It is fast, it is violent, it is almost impossible to process. And that was exactly why critics rejected Event Horizon when it first arrived. They saw chaos, they saw excess. What they did not see was a concept that would haunt science fiction horror for decades. The premise is simple on the surface. A rescue crew investigates a missing spaceship, but this is not a rescue mission. It is a descent into something unknown. The ship was designed to travel beyond space. It succeeded. It went somewhere else. And whatever it found did not stay there. It came back. At the time, reviewers complained about the tone. They said it was too dark, too violent, too obsessed with shock. But what they overlooked was the ambition. This was one of the first major attempts to merge hard science fiction with pure horror. Space was no longer just empty. It was a doorway, a place where the laws of reality could break. The film creates dread through atmosphere rather than explanation. The corridors feel alive. The silence feels intentional. Every character begins to unravel in a different way. Fear is not just external, it becomes internal. The ship does not just attack the body, it attacks the mind. It forces people to confront their worst memories, their deepest guilt. Years later, audiences began to revisit it. What once seemed excessive now feels visionary. Like the idea that space could be a gateway to something incomprehensible has become a staple of modern sci-fi horror. This film did it first on a mainstream level, and it paid the price for being too far ahead. But what happens when the future is not terrifying because of monsters? What if the real horror is a world that looks perfect? Number 8, Gattaca. 1997. Perfection has never looked this cold. Gattaca does not open with chaos or spectacle. It opens with a quiet certainty that your future has already been decided. Before you take your first breath, your limits are written in code. Your worth measured in percentages. Your dreams quietly dismissed before they even form. Critics at the time struggled with its restraint. They expected something louder, something more dramatic. Instead, they were given a film that speaks in silence, a story where discrimination is not enforced with violence, but with quiet exclusion. Doors do not slam in your face, they simply never open. The world of Gattaca is designed with surgical precision. Clean lines, muted tones, everything feels controlled, almost too perfect, and that is the point. Imperfection has been erased, but so has something else. Humanity feels distant. Emotion feels secondary to efficiency. People are reduced to genetic profiles rather than individuals. At the center of it all is a man who refuses to accept the system. Born naturally, he is labeled inferior from the start. Yet he dreams of space, not because he is allowed to, but because he chooses to. That choice becomes the film's quiet rebellion. He steals an identity, he lives a lie. But in doing so, he proves something the system cannot understand. Determination cannot be measured in DNA. Over time, the film has only grown stronger. As genetic science advances, its warnings feel less like fiction and more like inevitability. It predicted not just the technology, but the mindset that comes with it. A world where perfection becomes a new form of prejudice. This was never a slow film. It was a precise, every moment calculated, every emotion restrained. And that restraint is what makes it powerful. But what happens when the question is not about perfection? What if reality itself is the illusion? Number 7. The 13th Floor. Dear 1999. It arrived quietly and disappeared just as fast. The 13th Floor had the misfortune of existing in the same year as a cultural giant that redefined science fiction. Critics compared it instantly, and in that comparison it was dismissed. Not because it lacked ideas, but because it explored them differently. The film begins with a breakthrough that feels almost innocent, a virtual world so advanced that the people inside it believe they are real. They think, they feel, they live entire lives without knowing they are part of a simulation, and that is where the danger begins. What starts as a technological marvel slowly transforms into an existential nightmare. A man discovers clues that his world may not be authentic. Messages appear where they should not. Actions have consequences that do not make sense. And then comes the realization that reality may not be the top layer. It may just be another program. Critics at release found it lacking urgency. They wanted action. They wanted spectacle. Instead, they were given a slow unraveling, a philosophical descent into layered realities. And because it refused to rush its ideas, it was overlooked. Now it feels eerily ahead of its time. The concept of simulated existence is no longer abstract. It is discussed seriously. This film explored that idea with clarity and patience. It asked what defines reality. If a world feels real, does it matter if it is artificial? If your consciousness exists inside code, is it any less human? Visually, the film blends eras in a way that reinforces its theme. The past feels constructed. The present feels unstable. Each layer of reality carries its own illusion, and as those illusions collapse, the truth becomes harder to grasp. It was never trying to compete. It was trying to question, and now it stands as one of the most overlooked philosophical science fiction films of its decade. But the next entry shifts the conversation again, because sometimes the most terrifying place is not inside a simulation. It is out there in the silence of space. Number 6. Contact 1997. The signal arrives without warning, a pattern hidden inside static, a whisper from somewhere beyond everything we understand. Contact begins not with fear, but with wonder. And that was exactly why critics did not know what to do with it. They expected a spectacle about alien life. Instead, they were given a conversation about belief. Some called it slow, others said it lacked payoff, but what they missed was the quiet tension running beneath every scene. This is not a story about aliens invading Earth. It is about humanity trying to understand something far greater than itself. At the center stands a scientist who believes only in evidence. She spends her life searching for proof that we are not alone. When the signal finally arrives, it changes everything. Governments become involved, power shifts, faith enters the conversation. And suddenly the question is no longer scientific, it becomes deeply personal. The film refuses easy answers. When the journey finally happens, it does not deliver certainty. It delivers experience, something beautiful, something impossible to prove, and that is where critics felt betrayed. They wanted confirmation. The film offers ambiguity instead. Visually, the story leans into realism. The machines feel grounded, the science feels plausible. Even the journey itself avoids excess. It becomes emotional rather than explosive, a moment of connection rather than conquest. And that restraint is what gives it weight. Over time, the film has been reevaluated as one of the most thoughtful science fiction stories ever made. It explores the collision between science and faith without choosing sides. It asks whether truth must always be proven, or whether some experiences exist beyond measurement. This was never about aliens, it was about us, about what we believe when faced with the unknown. We were about how we react when reality expands beyond comprehension. But if this film questioned belief in the unknown, the next one exposes something far more uncomfortable. What if the future itself is built on manipulation, disguised as heroism? Number 5. Starship Troopers, 1997. At first glance, it looks like pure action. Soldiers, guns, giant alien creatures. Starship Troopers was dismissed almost instantly by critics who saw it as shallow, loud, even irresponsible. They believed it glorified war. They believed it lacked intelligence. And that misunderstanding became its greatest irony, because this film was never meant to be taken at face value. Beneath the explosions lies a carefully constructed satire. The world it presents is polished, attractive, almost seductive. Citizenship is earned through military service. Propaganda is everywhere. The media delivers information in controlled bursts. Everything feels heroic, everything feels justified, and that is exactly the trap. The characters are not complex in the traditional sense. They are idealized, almost artificial, and that design is intentional. The film mirrors propaganda by presenting a simplified version of reality. It invites the audience to accept, then slowly reveals the cost behind it. Critics at the time missed the tone completely. They judged the film as if it were sincere. They saw the surface and ignored the subtext, but over time, audiences began to recognize what was actually happening. This was a critique of militarism, a warning about how easily societies can embrace authoritarian ideals when they are packaged as heroism. Visually, it leans into exaggeration. The battles are intense. The violence is relentless. But beneath that spectacle is a discomfort that grows with every scene. The question becomes unavoidable. Are we meant to cheer, or are we meant to question why we are cheering at all? Now, the film is widely seen as one of the smartest science fiction satires ever made. It did not fail because it lacked depth. It failed because it demanded interpretation. And as we move closer to the top of this list, the line between reality and illusion begins to blur even further. Because the next story does not just question society, it questions time itself. Number 4, The Matrix, 1999. It begins with a choice, a simple decision that changes everything. For The Matrix arrived with groundbreaking visuals, but what critics did not fully grasp at the time was how deep the ideas truly ran beneath the surface. Yes, the action was revolutionary, bullet time, gravity-defying combat, a visual language that reshaped cinema overnight. But early reactions often focused on style over substance. Some critics found the philosophy confusing. Others dismissed it as overly ambitious. They saw the spectacle. They underestimated the message. At its core, the film is about control, a world where humanity exists inside a simulation designed to keep them passive. The illusion is comfortable, it feels real, and that is what makes it dangerous. The truth is harsh, cold, almost unbearable, and yet it offers something the illusion never can: freedom. The journey of the central character is not just physical, it is psychological. Accepting the truth requires abandoning everything familiar. It demands questioning reality itself, and that idea resonated far more over time than it did in the moment. The film pulls from philosophy, religion, technology. It blends them into something that feels both complex and accessible. The concept of living in a constructed reality was not new, but the way it was presented here made it mainstream. It forced audiences to confront a question that lingers long after the credits end. What if this world is not real? Visually, the film created a language that would be copied for years, but its true impact lies in how it changed the conversation around science fiction. It was no longer just about the future. It was about perception, about truth, about the nature of existence. What critics initially saw as confusing has become one of the most influential narratives ever told, not just in film, but in culture itself. But while this story bends reality, the next one fractures time. And once time begins to break, nothing can ever be certain again. Number 3, 12 Monkeys, 1995. Time is not a straight line here. It is fragmented, distorted, almost hostile. 12 Monkeys confused many critics upon release because it refused to explain itself in a conventional way. The structure felt chaotic, the narrative seemed unstable, but that instability was the entire point. The story follows a man sent back in time to prevent a global catastrophe. A virus has wiped out most of humanity. The future is bleak, underground, controlled. the past becomes the only chance to understand what went wrong. But every attempt to fix it only deepens the confusion. What makes the film powerful is its refusal to offer clarity. Memories feel unreliable. Events repeat with subtle differences. The line between reality and delusion begins to blur. Is the main character truly traveling through time, or is he losing his mind? The film never answers this directly. It leaves the audience suspended between possibilities. Critics at the time struggled with this ambiguity. They wanted structure, they wanted answers. Instead, they were given a puzzle that loops back on itself, a story where cause and effect become indistinguishable, and because it did not conform to expectations, it was misunderstood. Over time, its brilliance became undeniable. The film explores fate in a way that feels almost inevitable. No matter what actions are taken, the outcome remains the same. The tragedy is not just what happens, it is the realization that it was always going to happen. Visually, the film leans into distortion, wide angles, harsh lighting. Everything feels slightly off, as if the world itself is unstable. That visual discomfort mirrors the narrative perfectly. Nothing can be trusted, not even memory. Now it stands as one of the most complex time travel stories ever told. Not because it explains everything, but because it embraces uncertainty. And as we approach the final entries, the questions become even more unsettling. Because the next film does not just blur reality, it dissolves it completely. Number 2, Existence 1999. The game begins before you even realize you are playing. Existence does not introduce its rules. Case it dissolves them, critics at the time reacted with confusion and discomfort. They saw something strange, something unsettling. What they failed to recognize was a vision of reality that feels disturbingly close to the present. The film centers on a new form of gaming that connects directly to the human body. No screens, no controllers. The experience is organic, physical, almost invasive. Once inside the game, the boundary between player and character disappears, and that is where everything begins to unravel. At first, the world seems coherent: missions, objectives, clear directions. But slowly, those structures collapse, characters behave unpredictably, dialogue feels scripted yet meaningless, and the question emerges, is this still the game, or has reality itself become part of it? Critics struggled with its tone. It was not traditional science fiction. It was not straightforward horror. It existed somewhere in between. The organic technology disturbed audiences. The narrative refused to settle into a single layer of reality. Each twist pulled the ground further away. By the end, nothing feels stable, not even the idea of identity. What makes the film powerful is how it anticipates the future, the obsession with immersive experiences, the desire to escape into constructed worlds, the fear that those worlds might become indistinguishable from real life. It predicted a culture where digital environments hold emotional weight equal to reality. Visually, it embraces discomfort. Technology looks alive, almost biological. The environments shift subtly, as if responding to the player rather than existing independently. That design reinforces the core idea. Reality is not fixed. It is something that can be manipulated. Over time, the film has gained recognition as one of the most daring explorations of virtual reality ever created. It did not fail because it lacked clarity. It failed because it challenged the audience to question everything they were seeing. And now we reach the final entry, a film that was never misunderstood for its message, but was overlooked for its power. Number 1, Strange Days, 1995. It does not begin with machines or aliens. It begins with a memory that is not your own. Strange Days drops you into a world where experiences can be recorded and replayed. Not watched, lived. You feel everything, every emotion, every sensation, and once that door is opened, it can never be closed. When it released, critics did not know how to categorize it. Some saw it as messy, others dismissed it as excessive. The blend of science fiction, crime, and social commentary felt uneven to them. But what they missed was how precise its vision actually was. This was not just a story about technology, it was a warning about obsession. The film is set on the edge of a new millennium. Society feels tense, unstable, people are searching for escape, and the technology offers exactly that. You can live someone else's life for a moment. You can experience thrill without consequence. But that escape becomes addictive. Reality begins to lose its weight. At the center is a man who deals in these recorded experiences. He sells memories like currency, But as the story unfolds, he becomes entangled in something darker, a recorded moment that exposes violence, corruption, truth that powerful people want hidden. And suddenly the technology is no longer just entertainment. It becomes evidence, it becomes dangerous. What makes the film stand out is how ahead of its time it feels. The idea of living through recorded experiences mirrors the modern obsession with immersive media, the need to feel something real through artificial means. It predicted a culture where reality is filtered through technology and emotion becomes something that can be consumed. Visually, the film is intense. The recorded sequences place you directly inside the experience. The camera becomes the eyes, the sound becomes the heartbeat. It creates a level of immersion that feels almost invasive. Over time, the film has been reevaluated as one of the most prophetic science fiction stories of its era. It did not fail because it lacked focus. It failed because it showed a future people were not ready to confront. And now looking back, it feels less like fiction and more like a reflection of where we are heading. These films were never failures. They were warnings. Ideas ahead of their time waiting for the world to catch up. If you see them now, you see them differently. Tell us which one changed your perspective and subscribe for more deep dives into cinema that history almost forgot.